Hi everyone, we'll make a start shortly. We're just going to wait for everyone to join. I'll just give it one more minute and then we'll make a start. Good morning. Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a great pleasure to welcome you to Parliament Week 2020 and to today's webinar, How Can You Journey to COP26 with Your MP? My name's Emma and I'm the Events Officer at Hope for the Future. And before we get started, I'm just going to tell you a little bit more about us. Hope for the Future is a climate communications charity which works nationally to equip communities and individuals across the country to communicate the urgency of climate change with their local politicians. We feel that it's vitally important that MPs and constituents have rich and challenging conversations about climate change and the climate crisis, and that's what we try to facilitate. So we're running today's event as part of Parliament Week 2020. For those of you that don't know anything about Parliament Week, it's an annual festival that runs to engage people across the country with their UK Parliament. The way they do that is by exploring what Parliament means to them and also empowering them to get more involved. There's a lot of other digital events happening this week, so make sure you check them out. You can head over to @YourUKParl on Twitter or follow the hashtag UKPW to see what's going on. So before we make a start, some housekeeping. Firstly, we will be recording today's webinar, so it'll be available on demand for you to watch again and share. We'll be sending it to all our attendees in a follow-up email this week and directing you to some of Hope for the Future's latest resources, more webinars like this, and more information about next steps on how you can get involved. And speaking of getting involved, please do get involved today. You can do this by posting your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and also by upvoting the questions that you would most like to see answers to. We'll be finishing the session today with a Q&A, so do feel free to keep posting your questions throughout the session beforehand. You can also let other people know that you're at the webinar today by following us on social media @HopeFTFuture and using the hashtags HFTFwebinar or UKPW. Also on your dashboard, you'll see a chat box. Please use this as a space to introduce yourself and chat with other people on the webinar today. I'll be monitoring the chat, so if you have any questions, I'll be sure to respond to them. And finally, at the end of the webinar, a feedback form will pop up in your browser. If you could take the time to fill that in, that would be great. It's only really short, but it's a huge help to our evaluation. So today, we're going to be looking a little bit more closely at COP26 and discovering why it's such a critical time for climate negotiations. We'll be looking at the role of the UK in these discussions, and then we'll be looking ahead to the role of young people during the build-up to COP26 next November. We're going to end as well by giving you some practical advice and some guidance on how you can journey to COP26 with your MP. So it's my great pleasure to introduce our speakers today. I'm joined by my colleagues Rachel Mander, Robin McPherson and Julia Cushion. And I thought before we made a start today, it would be really nice just to get to know them a little bit better. So I'm going to start with our Faith Outreach Officer, Rachel, who will be kicking off today's event after these introductions. So Rachel, morning. What is the current focus of your work at Hope for the Future?
Well, in the very short term, we've got an event next week, a COP26 Interfaith Evening of Reflection, which will be really good fun. And then in the new year, I've got some programs starting with different faith groups in the run up to COP26.
Brilliant, all very COP focused. We like to see it. Robbie, I'm going to introduce you first. Robbie's our Schools and Youth Outreach Officer. And Robbie, I just want to ask you what you enjoy most about working with young people and their MPs.
Sweet. Well, thank you for the introduction, Emma. And I suppose for me, working with young people particularly gives me a lot of energy. It's really inspiring to see their passion and the way that they're able to tell the truth about things and their view of the world, and particularly their view for a better future. And I suppose supporting them, working with their MPs, the thing that I enjoy most about that is seeing how affected MPs are by the young people and how much they want to listen to their concerns and actually work with them to implement the type of climate actions that we really, really need. So yeah, energy from young people and action from MPs, two best parts of my job.
Brilliant, Robbie, thanks. And we look forward to hearing more about it later today. And then finally, Julia, last but not least, Julia is our projects manager at Hope for the Future. And Julia, I wondered if you'd like to share with everyone what you were doing before you came to Hope for the Future.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Emma. It was actually 4 years ago today, also a presidential election cycle, that I had my first UK Parliament Week when I was actually working in the Parliament Outreach and Engagement team that runs Parliament Week. And I got to see all of the effort that goes on internally and the real energy that goes into Parliament Week, and trying to make it an event with all sorts of exciting things going on across the country. I still actually, up on one of my shelves, have my little Big Ben that I was given that Parliament Week. And so it's so nice now to be here at Hope for the Future, doing this event with all of you to celebrate Parliament Week, and with such an important focus on COP.
Thanks, Julia. And yeah, it's the second time we've run a Parliament Week focused event at Hope. Second year we've run a Parliament Week focused event at Hope for the Future. And hopefully, yeah, we'll carry on again next year. That's brilliant. Thank you all. As I mentioned before, we'll be finishing today with a Q&A. So while the speakers are presenting, please feel free to pop your questions in the question box. But for now, I will hand over to Rachel, who's going to do the first part of today's session. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you, Emma. Yeah, as has been mentioned, I'm going to talk you through COP26. What is it? Why is it important? And what is the role of the UK? So many of you will be familiar with COP26. It should have been happening this next week, but it's now running next year instead. It's going to be the 1st to the 12th of November 2021 up in Glasgow. COPs are the Olympic Games of climate change. They're the highest level decision-making body within the UN for climate, and it's where international climate negotiations happen. And a poll should be appearing on your screen very shortly, which is going to ask you how much you feel like you know about COP26 at this moment. Great, it looks like most people are saying that they know a little bit about it, but not a great deal. Hopefully today's session will help you know a little bit more about COP by the time that we've finished. So COP26 stands for Conference of Parties, and 26 represents the number of COPs that we've had. So usually they happen every year, obviously this year is the exception. 5 years ago we had COP21, which was in Paris. And this was a really significant COP. It was where Paris Agreement came out of. The Paris Agreement was 195 nations agreeing that between them that they wanted to hold the increase to global average temperatures to well below 2 degrees of pre-industrial levels, and pursue efforts to limit it to 1.5 degrees. And it was a real landmark because prior to this point, a lot of international climate negotiations had sought to find agreement on the level of emission reductions and then kind of subdivide that between different nations. But this was very difficult to pass politically, and Paris takes a different approach. So we've got this high level agreement around the ambition of keeping to below 2 degrees, but nations themselves come forward and state what their target is. And these are called nationally determined contributions. And the idea is that all of these ambitions are pooled and they're kind of totted up together. And then over a series of years, the level of ambition is set to increase. And that looks a little bit like this. So 2020 should have been the first year that all countries communicated their NDCs for COP26. That will now be 2021. But the idea is that every 5 years still, countries will be communicating updated NDCs, nationally determined contributions. And in intervening years, there'll be stock takes, measuring to what extent those commitments have been kept to and where emissions are coming from, which countries. And the idea is that this moves towards 2050, mid-century, where globally we need to reach net zero emissions to have a 50-50 chance of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees. So that's still very ambitious and there's a long way to go. And this leads us to where we are at the moment. So at the moment, the nationally determined contributions don't match that stated aim of 2 degrees. And this is captured by the UN Environment Programme report from 2019, which says that by 2030, emissions will be 27%, 38% higher than is needed to limit warming to 2 degrees and 1.5 degrees, respectively. So where we are at the moment is NDCs are compatible with 3 degrees of warming. And this is higher than where that stated ambition lies. And that brings us to the functions of COP. So the UK in its host role will be seeking to accomplish these 3 different functions. So firstly, there's an accounting role, so bringing together all the different NDCs for this next year. Then there's like an admonishing role, and this is really, we've had a build up towards the Paris Agreement in 2015, then we've had 5 years of negotiations around what the implementation of that agreement will look like. And there are different articles to the Paris Agreement and what's called the Paris Rulebook. Discussions have happened on such things as like carbon markets, climate finance, those sorts of things. But now we're moving into a phase of implementation. So 2020 is the first time that countries will have submitted NDCs that are updated. So it's kind of like a proof of concept. And the global community needs to pull together to work out how it deals with countries that don't increase their ambition in line with the stated agreement of the Paris Agreement. And that will be like a tricky thing to manage, especially around what's happened with coronavirus and the kind of multilateralism of different countries feeling like it might be eroding at the moment. And then that finally, there's an animating role. And at COPs, you have not just people directly involved in negotiations, but you also have a lot of non-state actors, activists, non-government organisations, faith groups, who are kind of seeking to share information and push for ambition, but also kind of cast the vision of why we want to get to net zero emissions globally and what a low carbon future looks like, and bring some of the positive energy and celebration around that. Another poll will pop up on your screen shortly, and it will ask you, where do you think the UK should be putting the emphasis in its hosting of COP26 between these 3 different roles, accountant, admonisher and animator? This is really interesting. We've got quite an even split between these 3 roles, but animator has won with 45%. So thank you for taking part in that. It's really interesting. So there's a kind of saying within the UK and climate diplomacy, which is that if you host it, you own it. And one of the roles of the UK is to lead and push for ambition among other countries. But it's going to find that really difficult if it can't say that it's doing that itself. So the things that the UK will be pointing to are things like the UK has the fastest G7 decarbonisation. We've cut emissions by 42% since 1990. If you watch parliamentary debates on climate, you'll hear that statistic a lot. In 2008, we introduced the Climate Change Act, which at the time was a world first because it gave us our target for cutting emissions within national law. And at the time, that was a cut of 80% of our emissions by 2050 from the baseline of 1990 emission levels. And it also established the Committee on Climate Change, the CCC, which is the independent government advisory body on climate. And then last year in 2019, the UK updated its target. So rather than an 80% reduction from 1990 levels, we increased that to 100%, so that 2050 we should have net zero emissions here in the UK. So on that kind of side of the story, we've got a really successful picture of UK climate leadership. But on the other hand, we've had a lot of success is based on the power sector policy that's been introduced. That's gone really well, but power sector is centralised. A lot of the areas that the UK now needs to cut emissions are not centralised. It's things like transport, it's things like housing, things that you can't change without people noticing, that you need to involve people in, and things with much longer lead times. You can't retrofit 29 million homes within the UK overnight. You really need to plan, you need to build skills within the workforce, all of these kinds of considerations. And so it's worrying that we don't have the policies in place at the moment. And it's the carbon budgets, they're set by the Committee on Climate Change, and they're periods of 5 years where the UK should reduce its emissions by so much over that time. And we're not on track for our current carbon budget. So that's a concern. And then finally, there's an argument that the UK should be taking a greater portion of emission cuts. So we are the 25th largest economy in the world. We have a great deal of infrastructure. We have scientific and technological expertise. If we are hoping that globally all countries will reach net zero by 2050, arguably countries such as the UK, with all of that expertise and resource, should be aiming to meet that sooner than 2050. And this leads us to the Committee on Climate Change and their latest report, which was published in June. It's available on the internet. You can download it and read it. It's quite long. They said that progress is generally off track in most sectors for the UK's meeting this target, and it represents no change from the previous year. Now that's a big concern, because this previous year is the only year we've had since introducing that target. And even though 2050 might feel like a long way away, actually each year is 3% of our time to meet that target. And as the host of COP26, there's a particular reason why the UK should be seen to be making good on the target that it set last year. And this quote comes from that same report. It has never been more important for the UK to demonstrate strong climate leadership, both for the world's future and for the UK's standing within it. And it's a sentiment that has been echoed by the Committee on Climate Change's Chief Executive, that's Chris Stark. It says, COP26 is a major milestone for the international effort, and it's also the date by which the UK must have raised its own ambition with real policies and programmes to put us on a credible path to net zero by 2050. And this leads us to thinking about this next year. If the UK wants to host COP26 well, it needs to come forward with its plans so that it can then push other countries. And in recent weeks, we've seen some really exciting announcements of other countries setting net zero targets, in particular some of the South Asian countries. But actually the UK has a big role to play, because we're kind of hoping that as of December, that will be 5 years since the Paris Agreement. There'll be a celebration on the 12th of December for that, and that would be a really good time for the UK to announce its own nationally determined contribution ahead of COP26. And so that date will be one to watch to see the level of ambition that the UK comes forward with. But we need that ambition also to be matched by action. And so there's a final poll that's going to come up before I hand over to Robbie, and it asks, how likely do you think it is that the UK will reach its net zero target before 2050? Okay, people aren't feeling that optimistic about it. We've got people split between unlikely and it's possible, as opposed to almost certain or very likely. So there is a long way to go. Okay, at this point, I'm now going to hand over to Robbie.
Just before you do, Rachel, I'm going to ask you a quick question, if that's all right.
Oh, yeah, that's totally fine.
So, because COP's been obviously delayed this year due to coronavirus and is now happening next year, do you think that that delay could be viewed as potentially a positive thing in light of people not being very optimistic about the UK meeting its targets?
On the domestic side of things, it's definitely positive in terms of there was a lot of nervousness within the environmental sector and non-state actors about the UK's hosting of COP26 as scheduled for next week. It didn't seem like some of the things that we would have expected to be in place were happening. And this gives a bit of extra time for that preparation to happen. At the same time, the level of disruption from coronavirus is a real challenge to the process as a whole. And it will be difficult to set a positive tone in light of that. And people, I think, are a bit worried about government announcements around being able to cast a positive vision about the emission cuts that are needed and the cost of doing some of those initiatives when people are very much struggling financially from coronavirus and other things, and how exactly that plays out will be interesting.
Great, thank you, Rachel. Over to you, Robbie.
Sweet, thank you so much. So yeah, thank you for that brilliant presentation, Rachel, and it was great to hear all about COP, and I hope many people who might not have known much about COP now do, which brings me to another poll, back to the polls, which Emma will be able to put up in a minute, which is, have you ever contacted your MP about COP26, the poll should say. So if you've ever contacted your MP about COP26 before, then click yes. If not, then click no. And we'll just wait for the results of that to come in. Brilliant. So overwhelmingly, 100% of people said no. They'd not contacted their MP about COP26, which isn't really surprising, to me at least. And hopefully by the end of the remaining of the webinar, many people will feel much more enthused, shall we say, about contacting their MP about COP. So let's consider then young people. So we know then that the climate emergency is something that's here and something that is now. Communities across the globe and at home in the UK are already feeling its impacts. And we know that without adequate action, that which works to keep global warming within 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels, then the emergency we currently find ourselves in will just continue to get worse. And equally, we know that if governments, including our own, implement ambitious climate policies, then the coming decades present a unique opportunity to guarantee good jobs for everybody, to level up the national and global economy, to restore nature, ultimately to improve the well-being of both people and planet. And it's because of this, at least I believe, the threats and opportunity that the climate emergency presents, which has led to the mobilisation of young people in countries all around the world. Young people realise that there is a problem and they want to do something about it. And the youth climate movement has taken many forms. Many of you, I'm sure, will be familiar with the school strikes. Some of you might have even participated in the virtual rallies which have happened during times of COVID. And the best thing about the youth mobilisation is that it constantly acts as a reminder, not only to decision makers, but to people, the public, that a better future is needed and that we are in an emergency and that action needs to happen. And further, I would just add that as young people, we do and must acknowledge that we stand on the shoulders of giants when it comes to campaigning for climate action. You know, it can't just be young people that do care about this issue, because otherwise the action that we need will never occur. So securing climate action really, really must be an intergenerational priority. But yeah, so the focus of this webinar is to provide an opportunity for young people to consider the COP process and how they can get involved with that process and why rather they should be engaging their MPs. And in a nutshell, I would say that you know, it's the energy of young people which has brought the climate agenda into the mainstream, or at least moved it further into the mainstream, and paramount to avoiding the renewal of our sort of unsustainable, older social, economic and political realities and moving towards a greener, better and healthier future is the energy and enthusiasm of young people, which can carry us there. So COP26 and the role of young people, let's move back to COP. So yeah, as Rachel and Julia have established, the upcoming 2021 International Climate Summit is incredibly important. The actions that are agreed at COP26 will likely decide the quality of life for many people around the world for years to come. So this really is the deciding decade, and we need action at COP to be ambitious. And I just want to mention a quote just to highlight sort of the enthusiasm that's coming from the highest levels of COP for young people to be engaged in this process, which is by the president of COP26, Alok Sharma MP, also the Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, who said that I want to engage with as many young people as possible between now and the summit. Which, yeah, it really highlights, doesn't it, the fact that you know, the president of COP is saying, young people, come on, get involved. We want to hear from you. So it's really important that we do take that opportunity to have our input and to be involved in the process. And what's really more important than that is that this isn't just rhetoric, this is being met with action too. So in the run up to COP26, for the past few months and the months that are upcoming, there has and will continue to be a series of live videos which you can tune into called Youth for Climate Live series. And this essentially encourages young people all around the world to come together to deliberate on a number of topics, including how to secure a sustainable recovery from COVID, implementing nature-based solutions, and many more themes will be incorporated within this series, which will basically help to empower young people with the knowledge needed to actively engage in the COP process. And then this preparation will culminate in a dedicated event for young people. The first time that this has ever happened, again, showing how enthusiastic people at the top level of COP are about engaging young people. So the event will be dedicated for young people, and this will happen in Milan, Italy, in a period known as pre-COP, which is essentially the preliminary summit to the official COP26, which will take place, I'm pretty sure, is around September next year. And yeah, so again, this really highlights sort of the formal ways that young people can contribute to building momentum ahead of COP and then be part of the processes at the actual summit. So just to highlight again the enthusiasm that's coming, the Italian Minister for Environment, Land and Sea, Sergio Costa, said that we need your explosive energy and your natural drive for innovation to inject ambition into global climate action. So yeah, this just further highlights the important role that young people have to play in protecting current and future generations. So before the actual COP26 summit takes place, there's a number of activities which are less formal that young people will be able to get involved with, which I want to bring your attention to. One of them is a brilliant initiative called COP26, which is a virtual summit happening from the 19th of November to the 1st of December. And COP26 will be a youth-led, youth-run conference that follows a similar structure to the postponed COP26 Climate Summit. And the aim of this will be to raise ambition for our leaders when it comes to tackling the climate emergency. And there'll be more information about mock COP, which will be circulated in the follow-up email to this webinar. And if you want to seek further details around this, then you'll be able to do that. And I would encourage all the young people on the call, especially, to get involved with that virtual summit. So you might be thinking then, given everything that Rachel's just let us know about sort of these targets and everything you probably know about the climate emergency already, is how is this issue not being dealt with? Surely we must be meeting targets. Surely we must have policies and actions in place. Surely we must be on track. But the reality is, as has been established, much different, and we're not, but we need to be. And one of the most important factors in securing climate action is the role of MPs. So we need to consider then the relationship between MPs and climate action. So yeah, why do we not see the action from MPs that we should? Well, let me introduce you to Rebecca Willis's work. Now, Rebecca Willis has conducted a lot of research on MPs and climate change, noting and finding that there are a number of ways in which MPs conceptualise the climate emergency and navigate taking climate action. So in one of the interviews that Rebecca conducted, an MP, for example, expressed how he didn't want new road infrastructure in his constituency, instead believing that cycle and walking paths, green public transport would be a much better investment, noting the co-benefits that this would have for reducing carbon emissions and therefore both for the health of people and planet. So this MP also told Rebecca that he didn't want to use climate change as the reason for arguing against the scheme, believing this would turn people off, as this MP believed that there was actually little public support for ambitious climate action. And this was not an isolated case. So what Rebecca identified was that there are a number of reasons for MPs avoiding vocalising their support for climate action. The very makeup of Parliament itself, underlying problems in British politics, but the aspects that I really want to focus on is public pressure and how MPs almost, with everything else that's going on in the world, climate action, even though it is this huge, big priority, or at least should be this huge, big priority, often slips under the radar and often is an afterthought in policy development and policy implementation. And there is a really quite simple way to change that. And yeah, it begins with us. Because when we look at the survey data, and there's lots of survey data which exists, we know that many people, the majority of the British public, you know, they do favour ambitious climate action. They believe that it's something that's happening, and they believe that it's something that's happening as a consequence of human behaviour. So why then are MPs appearing to not follow this survey data? Well, MPs are people who are constantly juggling multiple priorities, dealing with several policy areas a day. And when they consider what to spend their time on, they will largely be thinking about what their constituents care about. And this data is established and obtained through door knocking, receiving emails, that sort of thing. So whilst the survey data might suggest, and while the school strikes might suggest that there is a demand for climate action amongst the British public, often MPs feel like this isn't completely widespread and reflective of their constituents' needs. And that's because often the salience that is considered when it comes to climate change is very low. So people often prioritise alternative policy areas, alternative action on other developments over ambitious climate action. So yeah, this is one of the main reasons why MPs often aren't doing some of the things that we might want them to see, shall we say. So with this considered then, why is it important for us to engage on COP26? And why is it important for us to engage our MPs on COP26? Well, we've seen that when we actually lobby our MPs, we can change their hearts and minds. So I'm going to use the example of Layla Moran, who basically, as a result of an engagement she had with some of her young constituents, she found that there was actually quite a big appetite for action within her constituency, which is where the quote, "I have heard them, they are angry, and so am I," came from. So after engaging with her constituents on climate change and after hearing their views, Layla Moran actually went on to secure a debate in Parliament, which was one of the many contributing factors to the UK's successful passing of the 2050 net zero target, which is evidence globalisation impacts UK politics. And when we actually engage with our MPs and show them that we care and show them that support for climate action is widespread, change can and does happen. So let's look at that again from a Hope for the Future perspective. So in my role at Hope for the Future as Schools and Youth Outreach Officer, I have the immense privilege of supporting young people across the country and encouraging their MPs to consider the climate emergency and taking ambitious climate action. This is done through school workshops, a young person's training programme, formerly the STP, which is going to be relaunched as Making Climate Politics Easier on the 23rd of November, and our national art competition, My Hope for the Future. And in my experience, the things that I've just discussed do ring true. So from Rebecca's sort of perspective and the research that she's done, I find that a lot of MPs don't feel comfortable speaking about the climate emergency and vocalising support for action to overcome that. And I feel that amongst the people that I meet, the many young people, the teachers, people do care about it. And the gap then is that people, while they care, they're prioritising other issues and or they're not contacting their MP about the issue of climate change, which is leading to this sort of period of inaction or delay, shall we say. So yeah, there's many ways then that we can lobby our MPs, and there's lots of ways to do that with Hope for the Future. Some of the programmes which I've just mentioned, further information will be circulated around them after this webinar. But let's consider then some of the practical things that you can ask your MP to do to ensure a successful COP26. So you'll see a little table with some of the potential actions that you can ask your MP to do and some of the benefits that come alongside this. And Hope for the Future, if you do want to take this further, can really support you in developing these asks that you put to your MP and really developing and supporting you in understanding who your MP is and how to have a successful engagement with them. Because the really key thing here is that whilst there are 650 MPs that you might think are quite largely the same, they are very, very different, and all of their priorities will be different, and the things that they do will be different. So tailoring the things that you ask them to that MP is really, really important. So yeah, you can see in the table then, written questions, writing to ministers, engaging with local authorities, media engagement, and holding events are some of the many ways that you can engage your MP in the run-up to COP. So by asking written questions, for example, you can use this to gather information from different departments and hold them to account, and that can really support your campaigns in the run-up to COP, and it can support developments that happen within departments. Writing to ministers is really helpful for ministers to know that MPs what MPs are being pressed about, and if they're sent a letter by an MP, then the response is from the minister, which means that there's this great engagement that begins to happen between constituents, MPs, and then the government. And then engaging with local authorities. So local and national climate action must really happen together for us to effectively combat this problem. And yeah, asking our MPs to work with councils could often and can lead to more ambitious local authorities, and MPs vocalising support for local authorities within Parliament can help lead to the allocation of resources that local authorities really need to make the commitments that they've made a reality. And then the media then, so having your MP write in the local media is a great way to spotlight an issue and increase engagement around an issue. And the fact that many people trust local media sources a lot more than national newspapers really means that people will begin to engage with them problems much deeper and much further. And then events like this maybe are a great way to engage your MP. You could have a panel event where MPs are able to hear from a number of experts, and then the audience can be made up of constituents, allowing them to hear expert opinion and the views and opinions of their constituents at the same time is a really great and effective way to engage your MP in the run-up to COP26. So yeah, these are some of the ways that you can engage your MP, and obviously the preparation for that can be done by getting in touch with Hope for the Future. But it would be really interesting to know that given everything that Rachel and Julia have highlighted about the importance of this summit that's happening next year, and everything that I've tried and attempted to outline in terms of young people really being the people that must be involved to help determine the outcome of this summit and the outcome of our futures, essentially. And then given the fact that, you know, we're not meeting our targets and we need more ambition and greater action from members of Parliament, it would be interesting to know that if you now feel you would contact your MP about COP, and ask them to implement some of these actions, whether it's a written question, whether it's them writing in the media, to ensure that, you know, as a parliament, as a public, we're building the momentum that is needed to make this international summit a success. So the poll should come up on your screen in a second. So if you could answer that, it would be really interesting to hear your answers. Brilliant. So the results, yeah, probably not the best, but as you can see, there's a few people who are going to be hoping to send an email after this webinar, contacting their MP about COP26, which is great. And if you're one of them people, then do please get in touch with Hope for the Future, and we'll be able to support you in that process. And for the people that feel like maybe they need a bit more information, then definitely do get in touch with Hope for the Future, and we should be able to help provide you with the further information that you need, whether it's about COP26 or whether it's about lobbying your MPs and the importance of doing that. So yeah, in terms of next steps, I'm going to pass over to Emma, who will be able to conclude the rest of the webinar. So thank you for that.
Oh, he's gone. Robbie, can you come back and I can ask you the first of our questions?
Yeah, I got that.
No worries. So I just wanted to know, given everything that you've said and obviously the enthusiasm that Alok Sharma has for involving young people in COP26, do you feel that young people can genuinely feed into the COP negotiations next year? And what would you say were like the top three, like what would be the main 3 steps to do that?
Yeah, so I mean, I definitely do feel like young people can feed into the process. There's many different ways. As I mentioned, you can get involved in the Youth for Climate Live series, increase your knowledge and understanding. You can apply to attend the pre-COP event in Milan and feed into pre-summit negotiations there. And then there's many different events that will be happening at COP26 that young people can attend. But obviously, we need to acknowledge that them things might not be accessible to everybody, heading over to Milan or heading even up to Glasgow to get involved. So there are many ways that you can get involved, which are alternatives. So again, the mock COP26 virtual summit, all that requires is a laptop. So the people on this call can definitely get involved with that. And that might not seem like it's formally contributing to the negotiations, but you know, if you're contributing to the building up of the momentum ahead of that process, then that's going to show the decision makers that there is appetite for really ambitious action at this summit. And then obviously I would go back to the point of engaging MPs, which is of course really important, that's something anybody who's living in the UK can do, contact their MP. And by doing that, you know, you can ask them to do multiple different things, which will lead to a more ambitious climate summit. So yeah, young people can definitely get involved, whether that's directly at COP or indirectly through other mediums such as contacting your MP and then joining conferences and virtual summits such as mock COP26. So yeah.
Brilliant, thank you, Robbie. I'm going to pass over to Julia, who's been looking at the questions that you've submitted. We've also had some submitted in advance. So if Rachel and Robbie want to return, then we'll go into the Q&A for the last 13 minutes.
That sounds great. Thanks so much, Emma. And yeah, thank you both to Rachel and Robbie for your great presentations. Robbie, I'm going to give you a break, seeing as you've just done some hard work. Rachel, can I ask you our first question, which is from Helena? There have been some tensions between the UK and Scottish governments during the organisation of COP26 so far. How damaging do you think this is for negotiations? Is it something that constituents who are contacting their MPs might need to be aware of?
So yeah, this is one of the things that I think was a good thing about COP26 being delayed was that there was a lot of tension around maybe February of this year, February 2020, and it was causing headlines which weren't very helpful, because you don't want your headlines about COP and the hosting of it to be about how it's going wrong. But thankfully that seems to have died down a bit now, and we're hoping that with the extra time that won't be as fraught. If you're thinking about going to meet an MP or other person about COP26, a decision maker or elected representative, it might be good for you to have some kind of awareness or background about some of the difficulties that happened around that time. Claire Perry's resignation letter would be one such thing to look at, but actually, thankfully, it's not really a present concern at the moment.
Great, thank you so much for that one, Rachel. And then Ursula's asked, what does too far away mean? I think that was in relation to the slide about Becky Willis. And I'll have a go answering that if that's okay, Robbie, and then you can tell me if I've done a good job. I think what Becky's talking about there is that often MPs see climate change as a really abstract issue and something that isn't immediately facing their constituents in the same way that other social issues might be, such as housing needs or transport or potholes or bins. Of course, we do know that climate change is a really immediate issue, and it does affect some of those things that I've just mentioned. And so what Becky really encourages us to do when we talk to our MPs is to stop it being far away and abstract and instead make it real and something that they can really connect with on an emotional level. And I think when that comes into COP, COP is a big conference, and in a way it is not an abstract thing, but not particularly material like some of the policy issues we talk about. And that's why you might want to think about connecting some of those policy issues with COP. And so how can the UK play this role of animator that Rachel was talking about if it's not committing to the policies that will help us reach our net zero target? Could you talk about green jobs and how necessary they are in the build-up to COP? Hopefully that answers your question. Robbie or Rachel, do you want to add anything to that one?
Yeah, so I should have probably mentioned that in the presentation, my mistake. That was a direct quote from an MP from one of the interviews that Becky conducted. So yeah, the quote, it's just not part of the daily discourse, it's too far away, was in response to a question that Rebecca asked about MPs' feelings on climate change. And that was basically to highlight the point that because MPs feel that, it's not something that people talk about every day, whether that's outside Parliament or inside Parliament, and that you're right, Julia, the effects to some MPs feel like they're just so long term, that was the reason that people need to be putting pressure on MPs and engaging in that dialogue with them to demonstrate that whilst it might not be something that is talked about at every dinner table every night, or a conversation that happens with your friends every day and in group chats, it is something that people care about, and it is something that people want to see action on. So yeah, I think that with what you said, Julia, answers the question pretty good.
Great, thanks so much, Robbie. We have a question: how can you engage with an MP who isn't very involved with COP26 or is actively avoiding or doesn't want to discuss it? Rachel, do you want to take that one?
So I think this connects to the Hope for the Future approach more generally, and that is to find common ground with MPs and think about it from their perspective. So if it's not something that they've ever mentioned in Parliament before, you think they'll be sceptic, I would find supporters within their own party, and some of the quotes that have happened on both sides of the House of Commons to do with COP26, and then link it directly and be like, look, this is important for these reasons that you already care about. This is why it's important within the next year, and this is how you can support it within your constituency. Now that might not sound like a very specific answer with whatever that person has in mind with their specific MP likely. So please do get in touch with us, and we'll be happy to help you with some of that tailoring of how you can talk to your MP about COP26.
Yeah, absolutely. You'll receive an email from us afterwards, but also our email address is just info@hftf.org.uk. And we would love to help you, especially if you think you've got a difficult MP, because those are our favourites. And yeah, we're really trying to build momentum to COP26, as Rachel was saying. And I love this framing of it as the climate Olympics and something that everybody can kind of get behind and understand the momentum of. And so, yeah, thank you so much for that, Rachel. Robbie, did you have anything to add, or should we go on to another question?
I think, yeah, just building on what you both just said then, is that I think one of the good things to do is consider also why your MP might not be involved or might not have said much about it. It might not necessarily just mean that they don't have an interest in what's happening at the summit, but going back to some of the things discussed in the presentation, often, you know, they're juggling maybe a few hundred emails right now a week about COVID, and I doubt they're getting any about COP26. So because it just isn't a priority for them, or at least they feel it's just not a priority for their constituents, that's why we're not seeing the parliamentary activity around the summit. And the key to changing that is by you contacting your MP and telling them that this is an issue that you care about, the people in your constituency care about it, and then that's the way that we're going to get momentum going up to COP26. And everything that Rachel said about finding common ground and research and the hope for the future approach, of course.
Love that. Thank you, Robbie. Yeah, absolutely. The best way to get on the agenda is for it to come from the grassroots, from people, and yeah, making it real life. So thanks so much. If it's okay, I'm going to take this next question, which is from Monica, which is about, as well as contacting our MP, would it be worth contacting our local council? I love this question because I ran our councils project for a year, and we'll talk about councils at every opportunity I get. And yes, absolutely. Councils are going to play a huge role in this, and especially if we are thinking about that animator role, because for the UK to reach net zero, our local councils are, many of them, your councils may well have declared net zero targets themselves. They are going to have to write climate action plans and implement policies that help us get there. It can't just be the work of the UK government alone. And so council is going to play a really important role and could provide some really good case studies and momentum and enthusiasm around COP26. I know that Glasgow City Council itself is doing a lot of planning around it, but it doesn't just have to be Scottish councils. What can Sheffield stand up and on this national stage say that it has done in the run up to it, or your local council? One particular thing to flag potentially about the relationship between MPs and local councils is that a lot of the time, as you may be aware, local councils feel very strapped for cash and don't have lots of money to be implementing these policies. And there often are pots of money and bids, pots of money that councils can bid for from central government to, for example, implement policies on clean air or electric vehicles or retrofitting. And often the MP is a huge source of support and help in achieving those successful bids. So if that sounds like an interesting ask to you, as I said, please do get in touch with us, because I think it's a space for some really important action. And then we have another question, which is, what hope can there be for the UK to fulfil the animator role when it still hasn't made a public commitment on its own plans to cut its own emissions? Yes, we haven't actually seen our NDC yet. Rachel, would you like to take that one?
Yeah, I can do. This is a really interesting one. There's been a lot of work around some of the high-level representatives for COP within the UK, people like Nigel Topping, running lots of events or like festivals UK-wide to try and build some of that. There will come a point where that doesn't work if the UK doesn't announce its NDC within time. And I think basically the UK probably has until the new year. And if it isn't announced by that point, I think that will be where some of the efforts to play that animating role start falling apart a little bit, because rather than non-state actors feeling like they can celebrate and push positively at what is happening, they will fall into starting to lobby and being critical of the government in their handling of the host role for COP26.
Great, thank you so much. We will have to keep our eyes peeled and see what happens there. And yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if we're doing more events like this one throughout the year in the run up to the next COP. And so as these developments happen, we'd really like to support you and guide you through that as we get closer and as we see how these things are lining up. I think that's actually, oh, we might have one more question. What is NDC? Rachel, do you want to go through that one?
Yeah, NDC stands for Nationally Determined Contribution, and countries will have to submit them ahead of COPs every 5 years, and it's their target that they're going to hold to for reducing their emissions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in the chat a little bit earlier on, I did post a link. There's a great tracker where you can see which countries in the world have already submitted their NDCs and which we're waiting for. So yeah, thanks so much for that, Rachel. Thanks very much. Emma's also just put it at the bottom there. Unless we have any more questions, I wonder if anyone, Rachel and Robbie, you wanted to give a one sentence summary thing that people just have to remember and take away with them today. And mine is going to be very boring. It's going to be, please get in touch with us after this webinar, because, you know, hopefully this was a great introduction. I thought the results of the poll were actually really good. You know, people aren't saying no, they don't want to contact their MP. They might want a bit more support. And we're really keen to offer you that. So that wasn't a quick one sentence summary, but please do get in touch with us afterwards. Rachel, what would yours be?
Mine would be, if you host it, you own it. And actually the opportunity for us to lobby Parliament this year to make sure our own house is in order is a really good opportunity with COP26 coming up.
Love that. Thank you, Rachel. And Robbie?
Yeah, I would just again echo everything that you both just said, and just say that you know, this week especially might not be the week that you feel contacting your MP and thinking about climate change is what you want to do, but just know that this is going to be an on-demand resource, and as long as, you know, over the next few weeks, as we start to get our heads around everything that's going on, we consider this and we encourage other people to get involved, then, you know, it should all work out. It should all work out.
Yeah, thanks very much, Robbie. I don't know about you. I think it's nice to put my energy into something that's not scrolling and feeling anxious. And so this might be the thing that people want to do. But yeah, we'll always be around. I will pass back over to Emma, who will probably say the things I always forget to say at the end of these.
Thank you, Julia. I'm sure you wouldn't have forgotten to say thank you for attending. That's all we've got time for today. Thank you so much for joining us. As Julia's mentioned, please look out for the follow-up email that we'll be sending out this week with more information on how Hope for the Future can support you. It looks like from that poll, there'll be a few of you that are looking for that extra information, and we'd be very happy to provide it. And we can also link you to some of our already existing great resources, and such as the digital guide on how to journey to COP with your MP that was put together by Rachel. And finally, one last thing, we do have another webinar tomorrow. We're doing this in collaboration with the It's Your Call campaign at Purpose Climate Lab. And in it, we'll be taking a closer look at what's meant by green jobs and looking at who the key decision makers are and how you can hold them to account. We'll also be hearing from guest speakers currently working in a diverse range of green jobs across the North East. And you can register and find out more information at the link on the screen. I'll also include it in the follow-up email if that goes out before then. Otherwise, please fill in the feedback form. Thank you to everyone, all our speakers for contributing, and thank you to everyone for attending. We hope to see you again really soon.
Thanks.
Bye.